trophy wife accustomed to life's finer things.
Very nice lifestyle, beautiful large home, constantly going out to dinners.
Damian Bradford was a 22-year-old ex-con, hustling to get by on the mean streets of the inner city.
He had a number of prior convictions. He was a young kid who would hustle, sell some drugs.
They seemed like an odd match, but Damian was able to give Donna the one thing her rich older husband couldn't.
Their relationship wasn't milkshakes at the soda fountain.
In return, Donna gave Damian a taste of the good life.
She was paying him $7,500 a month between gifts, rent, and cash.
News of their taboo affair would shock Donna's well-to-do friends and make people in this upscale community wonder what other secrets this trophy wife turned naughty nurse was hiding.
The drugs were very easy for her to get.
But it wasn't long before the unlikely co-conspirators spiraled down into a twisted world of sex, obsession, and greed, the consequences of which would be deadly.
I said, I love you. I said, please don't leave me.
Raised in the hardscrabble foothills of western Pennsylvania, Donna Smouse was the quintessential girl next door. Bubbly, blonde, and beautiful in that wholesome heartland sort of way. Though by no means wealthy, Donna was raised by loving parents who worked hard to provide for her.
Her life was a very simple life. Her family was very, very important to her. She was very close with her mother and father.
In order to help the family make ends meet, Donna took a job at a doctor's office at age 18. It wasn't long before the attractive teenager caught the eye of a wealthy, successful urologist, 43-year-old Dr. Moonda. Having emigrated from India in 1971, Dr. Moonda was one of the most popular doctors in the area, a highly skilled yet kind-hearted physician.
Patients loved him, always willing to sit down and just talk to them, explain to them what was going on with their health, never talked down to people. So he was very, very popular.
Despite the quarter-century age gap, Donna was instantly attracted to Ghulam's dark eyes and warm smile. It also didn't hurt that Ghulam was extremely wealthy.
Dr. Moonda's net worth was $6 million.
As for Ghulam, he wasted no time courting Donna, showering her with expensive gifts and lavish vacations.
He bought her a brand new car, he bought her all kinds of gifts. On some levels, every woman's dream come true.
Which, to a teenager born of modest means, was like being cast in the role of princess in some fairy tale romance.
Donna would have been attracted to someone like Dr. Moonda because she thought he would take care of her and give her the riches and this other life that she dreamed about.
However, Donna's salt-of-the-earth upbringing made it difficult for her to be content as mere arm candy for a wealthy doctor. A few months after they started dating, Donna decided she wanted to go back to school to earn a master's degree in nursing. Ghulam wholeheartedly supported her.
Donna inevitably went to Case Western Reserve in Cleveland and got her master's in nursing.
After receiving her degree, Donna became a nurse anesthetist and took pride in the fact that she now brought her own cash flow to her relationship with Ghulam. Of course, with her husband paying her bills, Donna could simply pocket the money she made working as a nurse.
She was able to keep her own money, had money of her own to use in any way she deemed fit.
Having amassed a pretty tidy nest egg of her own, after 12 years of dating, Donna decided it was finally time to tie the knot with Ghulam. After the wedding, Donna took up residence in Ghulam's sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion.
Dr. Moonda and Donna lived a very nice lifestyle, beautiful large home, constantly going out to dinners, hosting dinner parties.
But behind closed doors, Donna's storybook life was starting to unravel. Her job had her working long hours at the hospital, yet Ghulam still expected Donna to play the part of full-time homemaker.
Dr. Moonda expected Donna to be at home when he got home and take care of his needs for him, especially getting dinner ready and just making sure that he was comfortable after work.
I think Donna had built up so much resentment toward the good doctor. She always felt that she was in his shadows.
To cope, Donna tried drowning her sorrows in alcohol. Unfortunately, the occasional glass of wine or 6 didn't do the trick. So Donna turned to something far more potent, a prescription pain medication called fentanyl.
These are drugs that are essentially legal forms of heroin. They're highly addictive, and people get hooked on them.
As a nurse, the drugs were very easy for her to get.
Though Donna tried to keep her fentanyl habit a secret, her love affair with the drug deepened by the day. Pretty soon, Donna was hooked.
She was stealing drugs from her patients and injecting herself.
In 2004, Donna's wicked fentanyl habit finally caught up with her.
She was detected as having done so in a random urinalysis test.
Donna's nursing license was immediately suspended. As for Ghulam, he viewed Donna's addiction as a stain on his good name.
He was very embarrassed, and he wanted her to correct everything.
Ghulam demanded Donna seek help for her addiction, and in June of 2004, Donna did just that.
She entered rehab with an intensive outpatient facility.
While in rehab, Donna found a new support system in her fellow addicts. Donna was drawn to one fellow patient in particular, a 22-year-old cocaine addict and occasional dealer named Damian Bradford.
He had a number of prior convictions.
Damian was in rehab because he had gotten into trouble. So as part of his court dealings, he was undergoing drug rehabilitation.
From the outside looking in, the friendship between Donna and Damian seemed unlikely. Whereas Donna lived in the opulent Cleveland suburbs, Damian spent much of his young life on the mean streets of the inner city.
He was a young kid who would hustle, sell some drugs.
Another big difference between Donna and Damian was their age. Donna was nearly twice as old as Damian.
Damian Bradford's only 23 years old. Donna was 45 years old.
Despite the more than 20-year age difference and their vastly different backgrounds, the chemistry between Donna and Damian was scalding hot from the moment they met. It was a complete role reversal from her life with Dr. Moonda. Now, Donna was the one robbing the cradle, and soon, the older trophy wife and the hardened drug dealer found themselves struggling to control their primal urges.
Donna felt things for Damian. He's an attractive young male. She's obviously not happily married.
Little did Donna Moonda know, but keeping her hands off hot young Damian Bradford would prove impossible. And when Donna finally gave in to her desires, she would find herself caught in the crossfire of a truly unspeakable crime. Coming up, investigators respond to a fatal roadside shooting and discover there is more to Donna and Damian than meets the eye.
Their relationship wasn't milkshakes at the soda fountain. They drank together and had sex together.
But did Ghulam even care about Donna's secret life, or did he view her as just another item to be bought and sold?
The doctor had offered her settlement for her to walk away.
They had an understanding that they would live separate lives.
By the beginning of 2005, privileged doctor's wife Donna Moonda had just completed a scandalous stint in rehab. But rather than merely getting sober, Donna made a connection with a handsome, albeit dangerous young man named Damian Bradford.
Damian Bradford's only 23 years old. Donna was 45 years old at the time. Damian showed a lot of interest in Donna, and he was really the first man who ever did, other than Ghulam.
Although the chemistry between the two was electric, after rehab, Donna and Damian seemed to drift apart. Damian returned to the rough and tumble streets of inner-city Cleveland, and Donna returned to her lavish life with Dr. Moonda. Over the next year, Donna worked to piece her life back together. But just when it seemed she was headed in the right direction, Donna's life would again derail in the most horrific way imaginable. Friday, May 13th, 2005. It was just after 6 p.m. when 911 dispatchers with the Ohio Highway Patrol received a disturbing call from an emergency off-ramp. The caller was Donna Moonda. A terrified Donna told dispatchers that her husband Ghulam had just been shot point blank in the head inside their car.
He was bleeding from his head wound.
Donna begged police to hurry, but vowed to do her best to keep her husband alive until help arrived.
She was a nurse. She gave mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
When EMTs and police arrived on the scene, they found Donna's elderly mother frantically flagging them down next to a Jaguar. She pointed officers to the car, where they found Dr. Moonda slumped over in a blood-soaked passenger seat. EMTs immediately took over the CPR. Thankfully, the 69-year-old urologist still had a heartbeat, albeit a faint one.
She performed CPR, tried to revive her husband in the passenger seat.
He did have a heartbeat. Donna had done a good job of keeping him alive until they got there.
But after several minutes of working to revive Ghulam, they realized there was no hope of saving him.
Unfortunately, not too later, they declared him dead.
When police delivered the heartbreaking news to Donna, she seemed devastated.
She was hysterical, was screaming.
But what exactly had happened? While EMTs tended to Ghulam, police turned to Donna and her mother for answers. Unfortunately, Donna's mother was too shell-shocked to provide much detail. However, Donna told police that she, her mother, and her husband Ghulam had left their home in Pennsylvania earlier that day on their way to visit family in Ohio.
Dr. Moonda, Donna, and Donna's mother were traveling to Toledo.
Donna had been driving for the first leg of the trip, but around the time they crossed into Ohio, Donna started getting drowsy and asked her husband to take the wheel.
Dr. Moonda said to Donna, pull over to this emergency rest stop. It's a safe place to pull over.
They pulled over to change drivers.
But according to Donna, no sooner had she pulled into the emergency lane, she noticed they weren't alone.
The van also pulled over onto the berm of the road.
Were Donna and her husband being followed? Before Donna could bring the mysterious van to her husband's attention, a masked man stepped out of the vehicle and bum-rushed the Moonda's Jaguar.
Someone ran up to the car and pointed a gun at Dr. Moonda and said, give me your wallet.
The doctor handed over the wallet. Didn't want any trouble. Just figured, give him the money, he'll leave, we'll be fine.
But everything wouldn't be fine. A split second after Dr. Moonda handed over his wallet, the attacker inexplicably took aim and fired his pistol.
He even shot Dr. Moonda in the head without any provocation.
Recounting the robbery was clearly difficult for Donna, but investigators pressed her for more details about the shooter. Outside of the fact that he was wearing a mask and dark clothing, Donna could recall only one other detail.
Donna told investigators that the man who shot Dr. Moonda was short, about 5'4".
But while Donna Moonda couldn't identify who the shooter was, she did have a theory as to why someone might target her husband. According to Donna, Ghulam's wallet was usually stuffed to the brim with $50 bills, and today wasn't any different. Donna also told police that just 30 minutes prior to the shooting, she, Ghulam, and her mother had stopped at a convenience store to buy some snacks.
Donna told investigators that maybe someone had seen the doctor flashing a very large amount of cash and then decided to follow them.
It was just viewed as a freak robbery on the turnpike.
Working off Donna's robbery theory, Detectives headed to the convenience store where the Moondas had stopped, but no one there could recall seeing the mysterious man in the van at any point that evening. With the convenience store a dead end, police turned to the local media for help, hoping a passing motorist might have witnessed something.
They immediately put out a plea for anybody who might have seen something to please step forward.
There were hundreds of cars that went by here yesterday. Somebody saw something, and we need that somebody to call us.
Police even enlisted Donna's help, hoping an emotional plea from Ghulam's widow might spur eyewitnesses to come forward.
He was a wonderful husband. He did not deserve this.
She was crying, begging people, please, if you saw anything, please step forward. I loved my husband. I can't believe this happened.
I said, I love you. I said, please don't sleep with me. Please, if anybody knows anything, please help us.
Despite Donna's public cry for help, the media blitz yielded zero new intel on the shooting, at least at first. But a few days after the initial broadcast, police got a phone call from a woman named Charlene McFraser, claiming to have information about the case. The woman told investigators she didn't witness the shooting, nor was she anywhere near the Ohio Turnpike that fateful night. However, she believed she knew a secret that might help crack the case. A secret about Donna Moonda.
This woman named Charlene gave the police there a tip that Damian Bradford had a relationship with Donna Moonda.
She said that you probably want to take a look at Damian. There's something up there.
And not just a friendship forged in rehab. A torrid sexual relationship. According to Charlene McFraser, Donna and Damian's affair started shortly after they got out of rehab.
They began to talk, text. They began to meet, lunches.
With every meeting, the sexual tension between Donna and Damian heightened.
Damian was a good-looking, very athletic young kid. Donna had jewelry. She drove a nice car. He was impressed by her. And she was attracted physically to him.
Pretty soon, the physical attraction had become too much for Donna and Damian to resist.
He was a young, handsome man showing interest in her. She was very vulnerable to his overtures. And he was good at what he did, and he played her like a fiddle.
She's basically dating and having sex with a low-level cocaine dealer. You know, it's very different from the life she had been leading just a few months earlier. Damian was everything Dr. Moonda wasn't. Being with him was adventurous and risky.
Not only were Damian and Donna now engaged in a full-blown sexual affair, they were also indulging in some of the old vices that had brought them together in the first place. While she knew it was wrong to cheat on her husband, Donna soon became addicted to the passion that Damian brought to her life.
Damian and Donna were clearly using each other. He was using her for sex. I think she was using him to fill in some voids in her life, this sense of adventure. Damian sort of swept her off her feet.
And while Donna was used to being pampered by her doctor husband, it was she who was now showering her much younger lover with lavish gifts.
Gold necklace, jewelry, expensive things. Gifts and money just kept coming. Their relationship wasn't milkshakes at the soda fountain and lovey-dovey. This was two people who met in drug rehab. And they didn't date. They drank together and had sex together.
And now it seemed obvious that Damian and Donna were finishing what they had started in rehab. Investigators asked their informant, Charlene McFraser, how she came to know about Donna and Damian's sexual escapades. Charlene told them it was simple. Damian Bradford was her fiancé. At least he had been, until she caught wind of Damian and Donna's steamy affair. But Charlene also told police that the much older Donna wasn't simply sleeping with Damian. She was apparently his sugar mama as well.
Donna had in fact gotten the lease under her maiden name for the apartment where Damian was living and had given him a down payment for a new Jeep and had paid other expenses for him.
It was a combination of gifts and money. She was probably paying him $7,500 a month between gifts, rents, spending cash.
According to Damian's fiancée, the money Donna spent on Damian had come from the personal fortune she'd amassed as a nurse. But what Damian's fiancée didn't know was that after 5 months, Donna was spending more money on Damian than she was bringing in, which meant her cash flow was quickly draining.
Towards the end of the relationship, the money is drying up because Donna is basically running out of money, of her own money.
Detectives theorized that Donna might have had to start dipping into her husband's bank account to fund her fling with Damian. And if that was the case, there was a good chance Dr. Moonda had caught wind of Donna's transgressions.
It became pretty clear to the doctor that this marriage just wasn't going to work.
Not only that, according to Charlene, the good doctor was already well aware of Donna and Damian's affair.
Not long after Damian and Donna's relationship began, Damian's fiancée called Dr. Moonda to tell him that her fiancé and his wife were having an affair.
When he found out about Donna's tawdry affair with Damian, Dr. Moonda was enraged. When coupled with Donna's highly public drug addiction, it proved to be the last straw.
It was known to Dr. Moonda about Damian and Donna, and they had an understanding that they would live separate lives until they had a divorce.
But Ghulam was never one to be stingy with money and offered Donna a sizable divorce settlement.
The doctor had offered her a settlement for her to walk away in the range of about $1 million.
To police, it seemed like an incredibly generous gesture, especially considering the prenup Donna signed when they first got married.
They had entered into a prenuptial agreement in the event of their divorce that would guarantee Donna a lump sum of money.
$250,000 to be exact, a mere quarter of Ghulam's latest offer. To police, for Donna to accept the settlement seemed like a no-brainer, and left them wondering, could Donna be telling the truth after all? Was this a robbery gone wrong, or something else? In a marriage riddled with infidelity, drug abuse, and lavish spending, police couldn't rule out any possibility. Coming up, police make a startling discovery.
They found anabolic steroids in the apartment.
But it's not the only shocking revelation.
Donna and Damian spoke on the telephone and texted a lot that day, about 25 times.
In May of 2005, police investigating the shooting death of Dr. Donna Moonda had just learned that Ghulam's 45-year-old widow, Donna, had been carrying on a torrid extramarital affair with a much younger man, 23-year-old cocaine dealer Damian Bradford.
They got a tip from Bradford's ex-girlfriend that he had a relationship with Mrs. Moonda.
Police had also learned that Donna Moonda stood to receive a generous divorce settlement from the doctor, a fact that made them question whether Donna had motive to kill her husband at all. That is, until they got a hold of a copy of Donna Moonda's will, and learned just how much more money Donna stood to inherit if Dr. Moonda died.
The doctor was worth far more dead to Donna than he was alive.
If he was killed, she stood to get about $3 million, about half the estate.
All of which made detectives wonder if the shooting on the Ohio Turnpike had been a random robbery gone amok, or something much more sinister.
They began to immediately look at Donna and Damian.
To get to the bottom of things, detectives paid a visit to Damian at his apartment. Damian didn't deny the affair, but he was adamant he had nothing to do with Dr. Moonda's death.
Damian made a statement and indicated he was in certain places with certain people.
But given Damian's lengthy criminal history, police weren't simply going to take him at his word. Because he was still on probation for his drug dealing charges, his probation officer paid him a visit and took a look around his apartment.
Damian was on probation. So anytime in Pennsylvania, probation officers can do an inspection, which was the ruse to get into the house.
It didn't take long for police to find something.
They find 19 $50 bills.
It's the same bill denomination Donna Moonda claimed her husband had been carrying in his wallet the night of the murder.
They had known that Dr. Moonda had been carrying $50 bills.
Did the cash in Damian's apartment belong to Dr. Moonda? Or was it merely a coincidence? Before detectives could answer that question, they made another, even more shocking discovery.
They found anabolic steroids in the apartment.
Police also found 6 cell phones scattered around the apartment, which to seasoned police officers suggested one thing, that Damian was once again dealing illegal drugs. And even though the drugs and the cell phones didn't connect Damian to Dr. Moonda's murder in any concrete way, they were enough to get him in trouble.
Steroids were a violation of Damian's probation, which was enough to arrest him for that, charge him for that.
With Damian back behind bars for the probation violation, detectives turned to the cell phones they'd found in his apartment. While most of them appeared to be burner cell phones strictly for dealing drugs, there was one phone that seemed to serve an entirely different purpose, keeping in touch with Donna Moonda.
There were many text messages between Donna and Damian, professing their love for each other.
I miss you. It's like the new relationship gobbledygook that you get into.
In fact, there were hundreds of text messages between Donna and Damian, including several from the morning of May 13th, the day of Ghulam's murder.
Donna and Damian spoke on the telephone and text a lot that day, about 25 times.
Police believed these messages would implicate Damian and perhaps Donna in the murder of Damian Moonda. But much to the surprise of investigators, none of the messages indicated that either of them had anything to do with the crime. In fact, in several messages, Damian made specific references to being in Pennsylvania on the evening of the shooting, and that he was anxiously awaiting Donna's return.
Some of the text messages on the day of the murder were, "I'll see you when you get back." He called her baby girl. "I'll see you when you get back, baby girl. I'm okay and I love you."
There was no sinister part of these messages. They were typical messages between the two of them that they would make almost on a daily basis.
Even though the text messages seemed innocent enough, and even though Damian had a solid alibi, detectives decided to track his cell phone signal from the night of the shooting.
When you're driving and your cell phone is looking for a signal, it'll hit tower to tower to tower.
In doing so, investigators were able to pinpoint the exact location of Damian's cell phone in the hours before and after the shooting. What they found was that contrary to his many text messages, Damian Bradford was definitely not at home in Pennsylvania at the time of the crime.
They could see that Damian was on the turnpike in that vicinity.
In fact, Damian's cell phone indicated that he was following Dr. Moonda's Jaguar as he, Donna, and her mother headed toward Toledo. And at the exact moment of the shooting, Damian's phone pinged off a cell tower less than a half-mile from the crime scene. It was now crystal clear to investigators that Damian Bradford was the man who shot and killed Donna's husband. On March 29, 2006, prosecutors filed murder charges against the 24-year-old convicted drug dealer.
They were able to build up a very strong case against Damian, and that's when he was indicted for the murder of Dr. Moonda.
But while investigators were confident Damian had pulled the trigger, they didn't think he acted alone. They believed his lover, Donna, was just as involved, but so far, they had little evidence to prove it.
They knew he was the gunman, but they couldn't say 100% for sure that she was the one who set this all up.
Police wondered if they put the squeeze on Damian, they might get him to admit that Donna was involved. But Damian wasn't talking. And as his case worked its way toward trial, prosecutors speculated Damian was keeping quiet in hopes that his sugar mama would take the stand in his defense, reiterating her initial statement that the man who killed her husband looked nothing like Damian.
He was confident enough that she was going to be his main alibi, his star witness, and he would walk away from these charges.
But as Damian's trial grew closer, it became increasingly clear that his wealthy socialite lover had no such intentions.
Donna Moonda's lawyer files a motion saying she's going to take the fifth. She's not going to testify on his behalf.
Damian had no way of knowing whether Donna had betrayed him, or if she was simply following her lawyer's advice. Either way, it was clear, even after months of sex, drugs, and lavish spending sprees, Donna wouldn't be falling on the sword for her boy toy anytime soon.
Damian knew at that point he was done. He had no alibi. He had no main star witness to get him out of this.
Coming up, Damian makes a bold move and pinpoints Donna as the mastermind in a deadly scheme.
Now Donna Moonda is the one facing a possible death sentence, and Bradford will be the star witness against her.
But who would the jury believe? The millionaire widow or the convicted drug dealer?
This trial had everything. Love, sex, money, drugs.
In July of 2006, just days before his trial was set to begin, Damian Bradford's attorneys reached out to prosecutors in hopes of brokering a plea deal. Charged with murdering Dr. Moonda, the wealthy husband of his much older lover Donna Moonda, Damian faced serious consequences if convicted.
He's facing a death penalty.
It seemed Damian was also hoping that Donna would come to his rescue and testify that the man who killed her husband looked nothing like her former lover. But once Donna pled the fifth, it was clear that wouldn't be the case. Forced to fend for himself, Damian turned on Donna.
4 days before trial, he decided to instruct us to set up talks with the government.
What he does is leverage all this.
In exchange for a reduced sentence, Damian agreed to tell prosecutors everything about the plot to murder Dr. Moonda. A plot conceived not by Damian, but by Donna.
Damian told them everything that happened from A to Z.
He waited to the very last minute to confess in hopes that Donna would come to his rescue.
According to Damian, Donna wasn't happy with the lump sum settlement Ghulam offered her for the divorce. She wanted her full $3 million inheritance.
She wanted it all. Donna wanted every cent that she could get from the doctor. She knew there was a far greater amount that she could have.
And to get her hands on that money, Donna concocted a deadly scheme.
Donna had put together this plan, and she basically told Damian this is what's going to happen.
According to Damian, Donna wanted him to murder her husband during their road trip to Ohio. Donna also came up with the idea of staging the shooting to look like a roadside robbery.
Damian would follow the car containing the doctor, Donna, and Donna's mother from Mercer County onto the Ohio Turnpike.
Damian told prosecutors that on the morning of the murder, Donna sent him a series of text messages. Messages that on the surface seemed innocuous, but in reality were designed to keep Damian updated on Donna and Ghulam's precise whereabouts. Then, once Damian spotted the Jaguar pulled over on the side of the turnpike, he set the rest of Donna's plan in motion.
That was the sign. Damian pulled in behind the Jaguar, walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle.
They were trying to make this look like a robbery. Damian robbed the doctor of his money and shot him in the head in cold blood, with Donna's mother in the back seat. According to Damian, Donna told him that once the police arrived on the scene, she would give them a
description of the shooter to throw them off his trail.
Damian was 6 foot, maybe a little bit more, and Donna described the shooter as shorter than that.
Donna even convinced her mother, who was also in the car, that the assailant looked much shorter than he really was.
They were the same height, eye to eye. He's on my husband.
In exchange for shooting her husband, Donna also promised to give Damian a sizable chunk of her inheritance.
Damian said that he was promised half.
It was her plan. He just executed the plan.
Damian Bradford was able to get himself a sweetheart deal. 17 years, which is the equivalent of like a manslaughter.
With Damian's confession in tow, police arrested Donna Moonda on July 24th, 2006, and charged her with the second-degree murder of her husband.
She's charged in the murder of her husband as a conspirator, basically.
Even after her arrest, Donna maintained she had nothing to do with Ghulam's murder.
Donna is still insistent that this was not her idea. She did not do this.
The DA's office wasn't buying Donna's story. In a press conference, they announced plans to prosecute Donna to the fullest extent of the law, even though she hadn't been the one who pulled the trigger.
Prosecutors said they were seeking the death penalty against Donna.
So on June 18, 2007, Donna Moonda entered an Akron, Ohio courtroom to stand trial for the murder of her husband. Charges she still vehemently denied.
This trial had everything: love, sex, money, drugs. A pillar of the community, someone that was respected, someone that was loved, that was shot to death for money.
Prosecutors opened by telling the jury that although Donna Moonda didn't fire the bullet that killed her husband, she was just as responsible for his savage death.
Donna was the brains behind this. This was Donna's idea.
To illustrate exactly how Donna engineered her husband's murder plot, prosecutors called Donna's 24-year-old drug-dealing former lover and alleged co-conspirator Damian Bradford to the stand.
The star witness was Damian Bradford, who came in and laid out the whole story. He put it all on Donna, that this was her plan, that she promised him half of whatever she got.
And in the days after the shooting, Bradford testified that he had shacked up with Donna in Dr. Moonda's $1 million mansion, celebrating their impending windfall through a sultry binge of drugs, alcohol, and round-the-clock sex.
Damian spent the weekend with Donna, according to his testimony, drinking vodka and cognac and having sex all weekend.
According to Damian, it was Donna's expectation that once the money was in hand, the good times would continue.
Donna wanted to live their lives together. They would get his money and live happily ever after.
But Damian told the courtroom he had other plans.
He said, I was going to take the money and leave Donna. So basically, he admitted on the witness stand that he was going to double-cross her.
Given that he was the admitted killer, Damian's confession that he intended to betray Donna may not have come as a surprise to most in the crowded courtroom. But there was one person who was visibly shocked.
Donna looked like someone had punched her. She was hunched over in her chair, sobbing, heaving. The tears were falling off the table in front of her. I've never seen someone that distraught in the courtroom, ever.
She loved this man very much, and that she in her heart thought that they would be together forever.
But even though a heartbroken Donna still carried a torch for her former lover, that didn't stop her defense team from going after him with a vengeance.
The defense said Damian just loved her for her money, that Damian didn't care for Donna. Donna's attorney described it as, Donna loved Damian, Damian loved Donna's money.
According to the defense, Donna's love for Damian was so deep, so intense, that she was virtually blind to the criminal aspect of his personality. So blind, in fact, that Donna knew nothing of Damian's plan to kill her husband until after he was charged with Ghulam's murder. As for Damian, The defense claimed he was so desperate to get his hands on more cash that when it became clear to him that Donna's personal fortune was running out, he decided to go after Ghulam's by making him the target of a lethal armed robbery.
He took advantage of knowing where she was going. He knew that she was going on this trip. He knew what time she was leaving.
To answer the question of why Donna didn't recognize her lover's voice when he demanded money from her husband, the defense cited the traffic noise on the busy turnpike. They claimed it was so loud that Donna could barely even hear her husband's attacker, much less recognize his voice.
Anyone who would stand next to a turnpike would see that you're not going to really be able to hear anything, especially in a high traffic part of the day.
It was an argument that seemed to make sense. But would it sway the jury? Donna's life hung in the balance. Coming up, will Donna's claims of innocence resonate with the court?
She did not pull the trigger that killed Dr. Moonda.
Or will the jury send her to death row?
The question that the jury had to determine in this case was whether or not Donna Moonda had anything at all to do with it.
Just over 2 years after her husband had been shot to death at a roadside turnoff, Donna Moonda found herself fighting for her own life in an Akron, Ohio courtroom. Accused of masterminding the murder alongside her young lover, Damian Bradford, Donna faced the death penalty if convicted.
Damian Bradford was the person that pulled the trigger. The question that the jury had to determine in this case was whether or not Donna Moonda had anything at all to do with it.
And on July 5th, the jury broke for deliberations. The next day, they announced they'd reached a verdict.
Donna was found guilty of conspiring to murder her husband and the associated crimes with that.
Once again, Donna broke down in court.
She just collapsed. She was completely inconsolable, crying, hysterical. I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
Less than 2 weeks later, Donna Moonda was back in court. This time to determine whether she would spend the rest of her life behind bars or be sentenced to death row.
The jury, I guess, took a little bit of mercy on Donna and decided not to impose the death penalty, but instead sentenced her to life in prison.
I think most people sort of expected that. The reality is, whatever you think of her involvement in the crime, she did not pull the trigger that killed Dr. Moonda.
Even though Donna dodged a death sentence, Dr. Moonda's family and friends were pleased with the outcome.
Ultimately, life in prison without the possibility of parole, how can you not be satisfied with that? She's not going anywhere. She'll never get out.
But even if there was some solace to be had in the verdict, there was little consolation to the fact that Donna and Damian's rehab romance had gone horribly awry and led them down a murderous path. Was a teenage wallflower whose good looks were overshadowed by her shyness and isolation.
She really didn't have many friends to speak of.
Billy Sullivan was a handsome older boy who had his own share of social hang-ups, but had worked hard to overcome them.
He was doing well. He was mainstream. He was successful in school, successful at work.
When an online chat room brought this pair of misunderstood teens together, It was love at first sight.
They became very close very quickly.
These kids were really extraordinarily obsessed with each other beyond any normal teenage obsessive relationship.
But when their plans to be together forever were threatened, this teen romance took a deadly turn.
When I opened the door, there were just large amounts of blood.
The investigation into the crime revealed one of these young lovers was hiding a dark and potentially fatal secret.
Any teenager being betrayed is going to react with rage.
And the other would do anything to be sure these two lived happily ever after.
The best way you can describe it is one of those old TVs that you're looking at it and it's fuzzy, and you know what you're watching, but it's not like you're doing it.
It was the perfect combination that kind of came together in this toxic relationship.
With its safe neighborhoods and tree-lined streets, Nashua, New Hampshire seems like the ideal place to raise a family. But for 16-year-old Nicole Kazinskas, life in Nashua was no fairy tale. Born in 1987, Nicole and her brother Charlie never really knew their father.
She didn't have that experience of having, her father around. He was quite behind in child support.
Which left Nicole's mom, Jeannie Domenico, shouldering all of the child-rearing responsibilities.
Jeannie was working multiple jobs, 3 different jobs, and she was doing so in order to provide for her family.
When her mom was at work, many of the household chores fell to Nicole.
Jeannie worked a lot, so, I think Nicole was helpful around the house and did what she could.
But playing the role of de facto second parent seemed to have taken a toll on her social life. And even though Nicole was blossoming into a beautiful young woman, by the time high school rolled around, she was more of a social outcast than a social butterfly.
Didn't have a large group of friends, wasn't into athletics or things like that. Certainly had friends, but definitely kept to herself quite a bit.
She was a loner. She was a recluse. She didn't like to go out, hang out with the other kids.
Nicole's mom, Jeannie, tried everything she could to help her daughter make friends. But Nicole had become such a loner that her closest friend was Jeannie herself.
There's stories of Nicole and Jean on the couch, plucking each other's eyebrows, painting each other's nails. It's everything you would want in a mother-daughter relationship.
But ironically, as Nicole's social life was hitting rock bottom, her mother's was blossoming. In October of 2000, Jeannie began dating a co-worker she met while working at an insurance agency, Chris McGowan. And it wasn't long before there was serious talk of marriage.
Chris and Jeannie had found each other, and he was in the home, and it was starting to take on more of sort of the nuclear family appearance that everybody kind of hopes for.
Though Chris treated 13-year-old Nicole and her 10-year-old brother as if they were his own children, his courtship of Jeannie meant that Nicole's best buddy, aka her mom, was no longer there for her 24/7. More isolated than ever, Nicole turned to a new social outlet, one that allowed her to engage with other teenagers without straying too far outside her comfort zone.
Nicole begins to play in that online world. Instant message, chat rooms, that sort of thing.
Pretty soon, Nicole was meeting lots of new people, especially boys.
She begins to meet people, and she feels comfortable in this role because she can be whoever she likes to be.
While weeding out the perverts from the boys her age wasn't always easy, there was one young online suitor who caught her attention. 17-year-old Billy Sullivan from Willimantic, Connecticut. Like Nicole, Billy Sullivan was raised by a single mom.
My mom and dad got divorced when I was 4. My dad wasn't really in my life after I was about 7.
And, like Nicole, Billy's good looks were overshadowed by some pretty stifling social anxieties. which prevented him from making friends everywhere except online. And when Billy met Nicole in that chat room in 2002, the connection was instant.
Nicole met Billy on a teenage chat line where, after a short introduction, they went private. They began talking to each other one-on-one online.
During these private chat sessions, Billy and Nicole came to know everything about each other, their hopes, their dreams, and their shared social hang-ups, which ironically seemed to melt away when the two were together in cyberspace.
It was cool because she liked to talk as much as I did.
With so much in common, Nicole and Billy's intimate instant messages grew increasingly steamy.
The back and forth communication became very intense, very quickly, and they wanted to be together all the time. I believe within 3 days he was telling her he loved her.
Apparently, Nicole felt the same way, especially once she found out that in real life, Billy lived just 2 hours away.
Billy Sullivan was going to scoop her up out of the confines of the pine needles in Nashua and whisk her away to a more happy land with a white picket fence.
They get to the point where they are referring to themselves as a married couple.
After a few weeks of this intense internet courtship, Nicole decided to tell her mom all about her new boyfriend. Needless to say, Jeannie was taken aback. Her shy, socially awkward daughter had fallen for a young man she'd never met face to face.
Jeannie had a lot of concerns about this. She was concerned for her daughter. She didn't know much about this guy.
But Jeannie didn't want to discourage her daughter from socializing with other teenagers. And when Jeannie found out that Billy didn't own a car or a driver's license, she volunteered to drive Nicole to Connecticut to meet her cyber boyfriend face to face.
She drove 2 hours from Nashua, New Hampshire to Willimantic, Connecticut. She was trying her best to control it the best she could and supervise it the best she could.
Under Mother Jeannie's watchful eye, Nicole and Billy finally met in person in August of 2002. The connection was even more intense in real life than in cyberspace.
Nicole was so attached to him. She was physically at his side every time they were together.
I think Jeannie Domenico believed it was her daughter's first love, and she was careful with it.
Over the next year, Jeannie shuttled then 15-year-old Nicole back and forth from Nashua to Willimantic several more times, always keeping a watchful eye on her daughter.
She drove us around the town of Willimantic, went wherever we wanted to go, she brought us.
With every trip, Jeannie could see the sexual tension between Billy and her daughter mounting.
Jeannie, it appears, felt like she couldn't stop it from happening.
Then, in the spring of 2003, Billy, now 18, obtained his driver's license. For the obsessed teens, it meant they'd finally get the alone time they'd been craving, so they approached Jeannie with a request.
In August of 2003, they decide Billy's going to come up for a week. He can spend a week.
Jeannie reluctantly agreed to their plan.
She wanted to be supportive, but was definitely concerned.
When Billy arrived at the house on August 1st, he tried his best to put Jeannie's fears to rest.
By all accounts, he was a perfect gentleman. He was sweet and helpful around the house and, tried to get on Jeannie and Chris's good side.
As well-behaved as Billy was, Jeannie was still reluctant to let her daughter be alone with him. But a couple days into the visit, she relented.
We spent time together, went and did whatever we wanted to do, because I had my car, so we had the freedom.
But no sooner had Jeannie loosened the reins on her daughter and Billy than a surprise announcement would tear the family apart. Coming up, Nashua police are called to the scene of a gruesome crime.
It was a very violent scene. We don't know who did this. We don't know what happened.
And a pair of shocking revelations will test a young couple's love in unimaginable ways.
The minute you're betrayed, all those positive feelings go out the door.
After more than a year of being chaperoned and chauffeured around by her mother, Jeannie, 16-year-old Nicole Kazinskas and 18-year-old boyfriend Billy Sullivan had transformed their online fling into a real-life teen romance.
We love the time we gave each other. We love the fact that we always wanted to be together. We love the fact that when we were together, things were great.
In fact, during a week-long visit in the summer of 2003, Billy so impressed Nicole's mother, Jeannie, that Jeannie allowed the two teens to spend much of their week together unsupervised. But on the night of August 6, 2003, events would unfold that proved leaving these obsessed teens alone together was a bad idea. It started when emergency dispatchers received a 911 call from the home of Jeannie Domenico. The caller was Chris McGowan, Jeannie's fiancé.
He was obviously very emotional, very distraught.
Chris told police that after work, he'd headed over to Jeannie's house for a night of pizza and board games with Jeannie and her family. But when he entered the home, Chris found a body face down in the foyer. It was Jeannie. Blood splayed out around her. Moments later, responding officers arrived on the scene and confirmed that she was dead.
There was a female inside that was deceased. She was covered in blood.
Unfortunately, there was so much blood that investigators couldn't tell how Jeannie died.
There was blood in that kitchen and in the beginning of the living room. Everywhere. On the counter, in the sink. On the refrigerator, on the doors. On the floor, all over Jean.
As CSIs began collecting blood evidence, investigators inched their way through the rest of the home and encountered clear signs of a struggle.
There was a coffee table there that was split directly in half. It was obvious she didn't go down without a struggle.
And a closer look at Jeannie's body by the medical examiner revealed that Jeannie had been stabbed multiple times.
There were 57 stab wounds and a fractured skull.
It appeared that somebody wanted Jeannie Domenico dead in a major way. What investigators didn't know was who or why.
We don't know who did this at this point. We don't know what happened.
To help answer those questions, investigators turned to the man who'd made the initial 911 call, Jeannie's fiancé, Chris McGowan.
He was taken to the police station. He was the only person at that point that knew anything.
But Chris McGowan was more than just the investigators' sole source of information.
Chris hadn't been eliminated as a suspect either. We were still trying to get a lot of information from Chris in terms of his relationship.
Adding to the suspicion was the fact that Chris had been covered in Jeannie's blood at the scene. But he had an explanation for that.
My first instinct was, oh, she fell. And I said, oh, God. And I looked down at her, and then I realized, no, she was not. I mean, she was not moving. And I thought, oh my God.
Was Chris telling the truth? As they listened to his statement, detectives were beginning to think so.
Chris appeared to be honest with us. He appeared to be forthright with his answers. It didn't appear that he was being deceptive.
Though when investigators asked Chris who might want to hurt Jeannie, he drew a blank.
Didn't seem like she was concerned about anything, or like, no.
He was extremely distraught by that, who would hurt his Jeannie.
Chris McGowan was also concerned for the safety of Jeannie's children, Charlie and Nicole.
That was really his next concern, was where are the kids? Are they okay? Oh my God, they're going to be devastated.
It was important for us at that time to try to locate the other members that lived within the home.
Chris told investigators he believed Jeannie's son Charlie was spending the night with a friend, a statement investigators ultimately corroborated. But what about 16-year-old Nicole? Chris believed Nicole and her boyfriend had been hanging out at the mall that afternoon, but were due back at the house any minute.
There had been arrangements to have everybody together for dinner.
At that very moment, as if on cue, Billy and Nicole pulled into the driveway.
I made contact with the driver of the car, who was Billy Sullivan, and he asked me what was going on.
Police at the scene asked Nicole where she and Billy had been. Nicole told them they'd been hanging out at the mall, where they took in a movie.
She said she went to the 7 o'clock showing of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Nicole also told police that when the movie let out, she phoned her mom to let her know they were on their way. When her mom didn't answer, Nicole called Chris McGowan and left him a voicemail.
She called her house several times, left messages for her mother to let her know where they were.
But as she answered detectives' questions, Nicole began asking some of her own. She wanted to know what was going on at her house and where her mother was. Given the chaotic scene, officers were hesitant to break the news to Nicole, so they popped her and Billy in squad cars and drove them down to the station for questioning.
She had shown up at the actual crime scene, and she was sent to the police department.
As officers drove Nicole and Billy to the station, detectives let Chris McGowan know the two teens were safe and sound. Chris was relieved, but investigators could detect a hint of concern in his voice.
He went on to explain that Nicole had a relationship with this individual that he identified as Billy from Connecticut. And he went into telling Detective Chef and I that Nicole and Jeannie would often get into arguments and disagreements in regards to the relationship that was taking place between Billy and Nicole.
According to Chris, the disagreements had reached a boiling point 2 nights earlier when Nicole and Billy blindsided Jeannie with a shocking announcement.
Billy and Nicole had agreed that Nicole was going to finish her high school in Connecticut with Billy and live with Billy and his family.
The fact that Nicole and Billy were talking about living together told Jeannie that contrary to what they'd led her to believe, it wasn't all innocent fun for these two teens. In fact, Jeannie was starting to realize that the moment Nicole and Billy were allowed to hang out alone, they had consummated their relationship.
Our relationship when we were physically together was, 98% sexual.
He's not driving from Connecticut to New Hampshire and not expecting to get a piece of that, all right? I mean, that's all that's on an 18-year-old's mind, right?
These kids were really extraordinarily obsessed with each other beyond any normal teenage obsessive relationship.
Needless to say, Jeannie Domenico had no intention of letting her 16-year-old daughter move to Connecticut to live with her boyfriend.
She realized there's a line to draw, and when my daughter wants to leave home and drop out of high school and move in with Billy Sullivan in Willimantic, that's where she drew the line.
But apparently, Nicole refused to take no for an answer.
Nicole had expressed a desire to file for emancipation. She wanted to be legally separated from her mother. She wanted to live with him. She wanted to be by his side forever.
Jeannie was dumbstruck. In just 15 months, her only daughter had gone from a lonesome wallflower to a love-obsessed teenager. At that point, she told Nicole that come Monday, her red-hot romance with Billy would be put on ice.
She realizes this is way, way, way more involved than I ever thought it was going to be, and she says, no, now I have to put my foot down.
Investigators asked Chris McGowan if he thought Jeannie's death had something to do with the situation between Nicole and Billy. Chris McGowan was fairly certain the two incidents were unrelated. Still, investigators couldn't help but wonder how far would Nicole and Billy go in order to be together. To answer that question, investigators whisked Nicole and Billy into separate interview rooms upon their arrival at the station. Nicole was questioned first, and investigators started by informing her of her mother's death. They were immediately struck by Nicole's reaction, or rather, her lack thereof.
Nicole, you're here. We're talking for a while about, your mother. That happened to me when you're home. When your mother was called to be bring out some shit. You understand that, right? Okay.
Her demeanor is almost stoic. It's like flatlined. It's like just calm.
In fact, Nicole seemed more concerned with Billy's welfare than she did her dead mom.
As soon as I met her, I do remember her just on ask, where's Billy, how's Billy? All she cared about was Billy.
But investigators had questions of their own. For starters, where had Nicole and Billy been in the hours before and after her mom's murder?
Nicole's story was that they went to several different locations in Nashua, to include Walmart, Dunkin' Donuts, Leda Lanes, a bowling alley, and at the Fizzling Mall.
Nicole told detectives that after hanging out at the mall and the bowling alley, she and Billy had gone to see a movie. After that, they headed home, only to discover the house swarming with officers.
They go back to the house and say, "Oh my God, what happened? We were at the mall."
Nicole then provided investigators with evidence that seemed to corroborate her statement.
She had receipts from an ATM, and that she also signed it over at Leda Lanes.
It wasn't just receipts that seemed to corroborate Nicole's story. In the other interview room, Billy was offering up an identical version of events.
He had indicated that they had gone to Dunkin' Donuts and they went to the bowling alley. He had also indicated that they had gone to the mall.
Billy's statement meshed with Nicole's, but his behavior was sending up some serious red flags.
He appeared to be very nervous. He was continuously bouncing his legs. He was uneasy in his chair.
Was Billy Sullivan hiding something? If so, what was it? And what, if anything, did he and Nicole have to do with the murder of Jeannie Domenico? Coming up, Billy and Nicole paint a portrait of Jeannie that looks less like Mother of the Year and more like Mommy Dearest.
It was kind of a casual conversation. It escalated shortly thereafter.
And when I walked in those doors, I didn't think that it was really going to happen.
It had now been 5 hours since Jeannie Domenico was found murdered in her own home, and police were treating Jeannie's 16-year-old daughter Nicole and Nicole's boyfriend Billy as possible suspects. Especially once detectives learned that Nicole was planning to move to Connecticut to live with Billy, but that Jeannie refused to allow it. On top of that, Billy Sullivan's erratic behavior in the interview room had also raised a few eyebrows.
Billy looks agitated, anxious. He's pacing back and forth. Police don't know what to make of him.
Billy may have been acting guilty, but his and Nicole's statements about the night of the murder seemed to line up. Except for one tiny detail.
She mentions they went to the movies to see Pirates of the Caribbean.
He says, well, we were going to go to the movies, but then we decided not to.
The discrepancy was small, but significant. Detectives pressed Nicole.
I started talking to her about inconsistencies in her story, in Billy's story. I told her we needed to know what happened to her mother. We needed to hear the truth about what happened with her mother.
At that point, Nicole cupped her head in her hands and launched into a far different account of what happened. Nicole told police that earlier that day, she and her mom got in an argument about emancipating herself and moving to Connecticut with Billy. It was the same argument they'd had multiple times in the past 2 days, but this time, things got physical. According to Nicole, her mother struck her repeatedly. Allegedly, the attack was so savage that Billy had to come to Nicole's rescue.
Billy was trying to protect her by kicking the mother. Miss Domenico then armed herself with a knife and went after Billy.
Nicole claimed that at that point, Billy had no choice but to protect himself.
She attacked Billy with a knife, so Billy had to defend himself.
It was a harrowing story, but was it true? In an effort to corroborate Nicole's statement, detectives once again turned to Billy Sullivan, who by now had gone from being anxious to completely unhinged.
I noticed that he was standing up and that he had slapped the table that was located inside the interview room. He then picked up a blue trash barrel that we had in there and appears to be vomiting within the trash barrel.
Detectives asked Billy what was making him so sick.
And he said, well, I have a lot weighing on my conscience. Billy confessed to us that he had killed Jeannie Domenico.
But according to Billy, rather than killing Jeannie in self-defense, her death had been the result of a premeditated murder plot. One that would allow Nicole and Billy to be together forever.
At any means necessary, she would have made it possible for her to be with Billy, even if that meant removing her mother from the picture.
Billy told police he was eager to please the love of his life, so he suggested a plan.
I believed that you hit someone with a baseball bat hard enough, you'd kill them, because you see it in movies. Well, if it's in movies, it's gotta be true, right?
According to Billy, on the afternoon of August 6th, he and Nicole put their final plan in motion. They told Jeannie they were heading to the mall to hang out. But before leaving, they planted a baseball bat near the front door.
He had taken a baseball bat out of Charlie's bedroom. It was part of the plan.
For the next several hours, the couple drove around, stopping at several stores and local hangouts.
They watched enough true crime TV shows to know, all right, I need to have an alibi. So let's make sure that everyone knows that we were nowhere near the house at the time of the murder, and that way we're scot-free.
Around 6:30 p.m., Billy and Nicole pulled into a convenience store parking lot not far from Nicole's house.
They parked the car at the local convenience store. And Nicole actually reads a teen magazine while Billy takes off. Across the street, across the field, into the yard.
At that point, Billy knocked on the front door. When Jeannie let him in, Billy saw the bat he planted earlier, but didn't immediately reach for it.
I didn't really believe I was gonna do it. You know, when I walked in those doors, I didn't think that it was really going to happen.
Instead of attacking Jeannie, Billy tried one last time to convince her to give Nicole her blessing to move in with him.
The conversation was just back and forth, you need to stay away from Nicole. Jean, we have to be together.
But as Billy pled his case, his emotions began to get the best of him.
But all of a sudden, he believes that it's not going to get any better and that Jeannie is going to prohibit him and Nicole from being together. So he decides at that point to hit Jeannie with the baseball bat.
It didn't kill her like in the movies. Instead, it just made Jeannie angry.
She turns and says, hey, what are you doing? They end up fighting. They're physically fighting with one another. As a result, the coffee table is broken.
The best way I can describe it is one of those old TVs that you're looking at it and it's fuzzy. And you know what you're watching, but it's not like you're doing it.
During the struggle, Billy realized if he was going to kill Nicole's mom, he was going to need more than just a bat.
He goes and grabs a knife that is in a butcher block on the counter.
What'd you do with the knife? Stabbed her. How many times, where, and a few times you moved through. Just figured put it on each other.
Once Jeannie was dead, Billy fled the house and met back up with Nicole at the convenience store.
Billy gets back to his car. Nicole's there, and Billy still has some blood that's on him. He asks Nicole to go back to the house and get a towel.
Nicole agreed, and moments later, she entered her house.
And Nicole actually steps over her body, gets a towel for her boyfriend.
After she gets the towel, she comes out. She starts to talk to Billy about how she was now happy that the two of them were going to be together.
Billy Sullivan's confession was shocking, and though it differed from Nicole's version of events, police believed Billy was telling the truth.
I had no reason to believe otherwise at that point, that the information he was providing me was nothing other than truthful.
With Billy's confession in tow, police confronted Nicole.
We tell her that Billy's starting to come clean on this. At this point, she had tears in her eyes and she started saying, oh God, God help us.
The tears flowed even faster once once police charged Nicole and Billy with first-degree murder. Though Billy and Nicole were both teenagers, since Billy was 18, he would be tried as an adult and was looking at a mandatory life sentence if convicted.
When somebody's convicted of a first-degree murder charge in New Hampshire, it's automatically life without parole. The judge does not have discretion.
Since Nicole felt she was adult enough to emancipate herself from her mother and move in with Billy, she was certainly old enough to be tried as an adult for her mother's violent murder.
Nicole was certified as an adult, and so we were ready to proceed on a first-degree murder case against her.
So in the end, Nicole got the exact thing that she wanted. She ended up being tried as an adult. Isn't that ironic?
Coming up, as Billy and Nicole's cases head to trial, another love-blind teenager enters into the picture.
She was 15. She had to lie about her age to come see him in jail.
And Nicole turns the tables on the only boy she's ever loved.
There's Billy, looking at the love of his life, and she's about to testify against him. And he couldn't handle it.
On August 7th, 2003, teenage lovebirds Nicole Kazinskas and Billy Sullivan were charged with the murder of Nicole's mother, Jeannie Domenico. Though Nicole was only 16 at the time, prosecutors charged her as an adult, which meant she and Billy faced the same sentence if convicted.
First-degree murder in New Hampshire is life. No possibility of parole.
Prosecutors figured that when the gravity of the situation set in, both Billy and Nicole would opt for a plea bargain. What nobody could have realized was that by choosing to try Nicole as an adult, prosecutors triggered a bizarre chain of events that would pit the two lovers against each other in open court. It started on October 29th, when the DA's office received word from Billy's attorneys that their client would not be pleading guilty.
Billy decides he's going to plead insanity.
According to Billy's attorneys, mental illness had plagued him since childhood. A childhood they claimed was so horrific, it made life at Nicole and Jeannie's house look like a week at Club Med.
He came from a home where he probably saw far more things than Nicole ever did.
As a young child, witnessed some severe incidents of domestic violence.
But according to Billy, the domestic violence wasn't even half of it.
When I was younger, I was molested by a neighbor.
As a result of all this trauma, by the time Billy was just 5 years old, he had developed some pretty serious anger issues.
His mom was unable to control him around her and her daughters. He had also allegedly attacked his mother with a baseball bat.
Billy's outbursts eventually landed him in a mental institution.
I started going in and out of partial hospitals when I was, I think, 6. Then when I was 9, they started putting me in the actual inpatient hospitals.
Billy was diagnosed with ADD, ADHD, bipolar syndrome, oppositional defiance disorder. His whole life was violent, erratic, out of control, unless he was in a structured environment and on medication.
By the time Billy was 16, he and his doctors seemed to have his mental illness in check. Then he met Nicole online and decided the only way he could truly feel the passion and intensity of their relationship was to quit taking his medication.
I wouldn't want to take my meds. I'd conveniently leave them home.
It was a powerful story, one prosecutors worried would play well with a jury. To combat Billy's defense, they would need a witness who could prove Billy was thinking clearly when he carried out the attack on Jeannie Domenico. In March of 2005, prosecutors asked Nicole if she would testify against Billy. In exchange, they would reduce the charges against her, which meant Nicole might one day walk out of prison a free woman.
We incorporated into the sentence that if she achieved an advanced degree, we would take 5 years off, the minimum that she could get out in 35 years.
Nicole told prosecutors she'd consider their offer. If Billy seemed heartbroken, it certainly didn't take him long to bounce back. Just before trial, prosecutors learned that while he was in jail, Billy struck up a relationship with another young woman.
True to adolescent form, Billy finds another love, Monique, and he starts to develop an intense relationship with her while he's in prison.
It was a pen pal thing, which eventually came to her coming up and visiting a couple times and a lot of phone calls.
Similar to Nicole, Monique was a few years younger than Billy.
She was 15. She had to lie about her age to come see him in jail, which she did.
Monique's youth wasn't the only shocking thing about her and Billy's relationship. Apparently, Billy was using his new teenage girlfriend to lobby his old teenage girlfriend not to testify against him.
Billy started telling her that if Nicole didn't testify, he was going to be free.
Unfortunately for Billy, his plan backfired. When Nicole found out the love of her life was now seeing some other teenage bombshell, she reached out to prosecutors and told them she'd take their deal to testify against Billy.
What we ended up doing was looking at a 40 to 80 year sentence for Nicole, with 40 being the minimum.
It was amid this back and forth that the state of New Hampshire versus Billy Sullivan finally got underway. From the opening gavel, prosecutors had one simple goal: proving that Billy Sullivan knew exactly what he was doing when he killed Jeannie Domenico.
We knew what had happened, but we were dealing with what was happening inside Billy's head when the murder occurred.
And prosecutors wasted no time calling their star witness to the stand. Spectators watched as Nicole was sworn in, but it quickly became clear the defendant couldn't bear the sight of watching his old flame testifying against him.
There's Billy looking at the love of his life, and she's about to testify against him. And he couldn't handle it. He could not handle it. So he asked to be let out of the courtroom.
Once Billy left the courtroom, Nicole proceeded to tell the jury about her relationship with her mom and how it went south the moment she and Billy started dating.
We were together all the time, so, we'd never be apart, so, if one of us was innocent, we were both were. If one of us was guilty, we both were.
When it was their turn, Billy's defense team opened their case by hammering home their insanity defense. They did so by calling Billy's psychologist to the stand, who detailed his long history of mental illness. Moreover, Billy's defense team asserted that a scheming Nicole seized on their client's mental instability in order to murder her mother. Nicole's alleged motive, her obsession with Billy.
This was her first extreme love, and she was going to make certain that it wasn't going to go away.
To support their claim, the defense submitted a letter Nicole wrote to Billy before the murder.
It was a letter where Nicole stated that she would kill to be with Billy, quote unquote, and that there was one large obstacle in the way, and we took that to mean Jeannie Domenico.
Not only did the letter suggest Nicole was the one who instigated the plot to murder her mom, but when coupled with the testimony of Billy's psychologist, it seemed the scales of justice had tipped in favor of the defense. At least until prosecutors called one last witness to the stand. Coming up, Billy's other teenage lover offers up some shocking testimony.
This girl says to Billy, my parents aren't going to like us to be together. Billy says, don't worry about that. I'll take care of that.
And with his fate hanging in the balance, Billy goes ballistic.
They ended up pepper spraying him. They ended up dragging him into the courtroom.
Thanks to the testimony of Billy Sullivan's psychologist and a letter written by his girlfriend Nicole Kazinskas, which seemed to suggest Nicole had coerced her mentally unstable boyfriend into murdering her mother, Jeannie Domenico, it appeared the jury might find Billy Sullivan not guilty by reason of insanity. But just before they rested their case, prosecutors called one last witness to the stand, Monique Teal. the teenage girl Billy dated while in jail awaiting trial. On the stand, Monique told the court that her parents had recently put an end to her and Billy's jailhouse romance.
And this girl at one point says to Billy, my parents aren't going to like us to be together, and I don't know what to do. Billy says, don't worry about that. I'll take care of that.
According to Monique, Billy was insinuating he was willing and able to have her mother killed in order to continue his jailhouse romance with her, which to prosecutors suggested Nicole wasn't the one who coerced Billy into killing Jeannie Domenico, but rather Billy who pressed Nicole into going along with the crime.
She did a great job showing a defendant who was repeating the exact same pattern that he had with Nicole.
Monique Teal's testimony seemed to swing the case back in prosecutors' favor, and after 2 days behind doors, the jury returned with their verdict.
Jury came back with a guilty verdict.
After the guilty verdict was handed down, it was time for the sentencing hearing, and that's where the real fireworks began.
The family in this case have a right to confront the defendant at sentencing.
There was just one problem.
Billy wouldn't come in, and he refused. They ended up pepper spraying him. They ended up dragging him into the courtroom.
Members of the sheriff's department brought him back in and made him sit there and listen to the victim impact statements.
Of all the impact statements heard that day, none was more emotional than that of Chris McGowan, Jeannie Domenico's fiancé.
Such a beautiful person as Jeannie so brutally assaulted and left to die. What kind of person or animal could possibly do this?
Chris had an impassioned speech and he was angry.
As was Billy, apparently.
Billy started cussing at him in the courtroom.
He was quickly escorted from the courtroom and brought to the state prison.
But even as an enraged Billy Sullivan was carted off to prison, those closest to the case struggled to understand how two starry-eyed teenagers could end up committing such a heinous crime.
It was the right, perfect combination of factors and personalities and mental health problems that kind of came together in this toxic relationship that ended the life of Jeannie Domenico.
It was a series of events. It was the situation that it was put in. It was the way we both reacted. You know, we both did things wrong.
Two troubled teens, one an orphaned immigrant.
Carlos was born into the formal equivalent of a toxic waste dump.
The other, a young girl with a turbulent home life.
She was subjected to witnessing deviant behavior.
Their troubled paths brought them together, first as friends, then as impassioned lovers.
There was a level of intimacy.
You can't separate them because together they're symbiotic.
But when circumstances tried to keep them apart, tensions not only rose,
He basically wanted to see him burn in hell.
they triggered deadly consequences.
You walk into that master bedroom and you see the carnage.
And left everyone wondering just how far were these young lovers willing to go to stay together.
This is something that you only read in novels. You don't think it's really going to happen in real life.
Though her middle-class upbringing in suburban Cleveland suggested otherwise, Tabitha Messina's childhood was chaotic from the word go. Tabitha's dad, Richard, was a hard-partying playboy type. Her mother, Karen, was an exotic dancer who wasn't home much.
Karen was an absent mother. Karen was not there for Tabitha.
If Tabitha's mother was home, it was usually to grab a bottle of liquor or badger Richard into giving her money for drugs.
We got called there for domestic disturbances, loud noise complaints, and Karen was the suspect in several burglaries and breaking and enterings and thefts and shoplifting, at times taking little Tabitha with her when she shoplifted.
Despite his own bad habits, Richard eventually realized that Karen was a corrosive influence on their daughter. He filed for divorce and set out to find a new mother figure for Tabitha and her brother Rick. And found one when he took up with another exotic dancer, Sandra Cover. The moment Sandra met Richard, and then Tabitha, she gave up stripping in order to stay home and give Tabitha some stability. But playing the role of Tabitha's surrogate mother was no easy task. Unlike Richard, Sandra was strict, and 8-year-old Tabitha rebelled against her influence.
Tabitha didn't want to listen to Sandy because they weren't married, and Sandy had no authority over her.
But Tabitha's acting out wasn't strictly reserved for Sandra. By elementary school, it was clear the neglect she received from her mother earlier in life had resulted in some pretty serious behavior problems. At least until high school, when Richard decided to put his foot down.
He didn't finish high school. I think that was his goal, to make sure she did.
He tried to guide her to have a curfew, no drugs.
But the more ground rules Richard and Sandra tried to lay down, the more Tabitha lashed out.
The police department got called in several times for verbal arguments between Richard and Tabitha, or her and Sandra.
But as difficult as Tabitha was to wrangle, Richard and Sandra got even more frustrated when she began spending less time at home and more time with a rowdy group of teens from school.
When she turned 18, that's when things went to hell on a handbasket.
She stayed out all night, she ran with a crazy crowd.
Between her good looks and outgoing personality, Tabitha knew she could pretty much have any one of the cliched bad boys within this crazy crowd she wanted. But it was a standoffish loner type within the group that caught Tabitha's eye. A handsome 19-year-old named Carlos Christopher. Originally from the slums of Brazil, Carlos's childhood made Tabitha's seem picture perfect.
He was born in a jail. His mom was incarcerated. She was in there for drug abuse and theft.
His father was a gang leader. His father killed many people. His father would take Carlos along with him when he'd do his killings, so Carlos could see it and witness it.
Eventually, Carlos's dad died, and Carlos was shipped off to an orphanage. At the age of 8, he was adopted by an American.
Carlos is brought to the United States and raised by a very nice family in Cleveland Heights.
But even in the cozy Cleveland suburbs, the scars of Carlos's traumatic childhood were visible. Like Tabitha, Carlos also lashed out at authority. And at school, he had a hard time escaping the long shadow cast by his father.
He would sit there and kind of brag to people about, oh, well, I got no fight with this person and I beat up that person.
Not all of the kids bought into Carlos's act, but Tabitha was captivated by his swagger.
I think Carlos and Tabitha saw something in each other that, you know, they both had troubled upbringings and they could relate to each other, and that's how relationships start.
A relationship that quickly blossomed into a passionate sexual romance.
The emotions were strong. Tabitha and Carlos themselves had told me that they were sexually involved with each other.
The more infatuated Tabitha and Carlos became with each other, it was clear there was more between them than just red-hot sexual chemistry.
When adolescents find someone else who's like a kindred spirit, like a person who's just like them, you can't separate them because together they're symbiotic.
But Tabitha was worried there was one person who would try to separate her from Carlos. Her father, Richard Messina.
It's been no secret to the members of this department that Richard is a racist. He does not like people of color, black people in particular. Carlos Christopher is Brazilian Puerto Rican mix, dark-skinned male.
And just as Tabitha feared, when Richard did find out about her budding romance with Carlos, he was furious. Growing up, Tabitha had tested Richard's authority, but after seeing his livid reaction to Carlos, Tabitha knew this was one issue her dad wouldn't budge on. And as long as she was staying under his roof, her relationship with Carlos would be doomed without his approval. So even though it hurt her deeply, after a few weeks of hooking up, Tabitha broke things off with Carlos.
Tabitha was upset over it.
Tabitha ultimately decided the best way to both mask her pain and ease the tension with her father was to immediately dive into a new relationship. So she started dating another one of the boys in their close circle of friends named Jason Gaylord.
Carlos and Tabitha, they split. They go on their ways, and now Tabitha's developing this relationship with Jason.
Richard was thrilled when he met Tabitha's new boyfriend.
Now, Jason was around quite a bit. Tabitha had dated Jason, and my dad liked Jason.
But beyond pleasing her father, Tabitha knew that dating Jason had another important benefit. Since they were all friends, being with Jason still allowed her to be close to Carlos without tipping off her father, which deep in her heart is what Tabitha desired most.
She knew she's in love with him.
But Carlos didn't know Tabitha's relationship with Jason was just an act, and seeing her move on so quickly with one of his good friends stung him deeply. So to mask his own heartbreak, he decided to follow suit and began dating Tabitha's good friend, Tammy Tabak.
At that time, I was dating Carlos and Tabitha was supposed to be dating Jason.
But on their double dates, Tabitha and Carlos had a hard time keeping apart from each other, even in their most intimate moments with their new partners.
Tabitha and Jason are having sex on the playground. Tammy and Carlos are making out a short distance away, also on the playground.
Carlos would later tell us that as Tabitha would be having sex with Jason, she would be looking at him as if to entice him toward her.
It was clear the former lovers still lusted for one another. But a bizarre series of events was about to put their true feelings to the test in a way no one imagined. Coming up, something was about to happen to bring Carlos and Tabitha back together. But how will Richard react?
I just had that sick feeling in the pit of my stomach.
And a routine 911 call morphs into a murder investigation.
You walk into that master bedroom and you see the carnage.
Kindred spirits Tabitha Messina and Carlos Christopher had just ended a passionate but short-lived romance, largely because Tabitha knew her father didn't approve of their interracial relationship. Following their split, both Tabitha and Carlos had jumped into new relationships.
Tabitha's developing this relationship with Jason, and Carlos has this relationship with Tammy, and they're all friends.
But forces were at play that were about to bring Tabitha and Carlos back together. It started on the afternoon of July 29th, when police in South Euclid, Ohio, received a 911 call regarding a possible burglary at the Messina home.
Don't touch anything, and I will send some cars over. We'll take a look around, okay?
But when officers arrived at the scene, they discovered much more than just burglary.
You walk into that master bedroom and you see the carnage. There's 2 bodies in there. And the room is a mess, and there's a lot of blood.
Responding officers radioed for backup. While CSIs cordoned off the crime scene, beat cops identified the victims.
Upon checking the house, they discovered in the second-floor bedroom, Richard and Sandra deceased.
Initially, the crime scene suggested Richard and Sandra were victims of a deadly botched robbery. Especially once investigators discovered Sandra's vehicle, a GMC Jimmy, was missing. But when when homicide detectives arrived on the scene and noted the position of the bodies, they began to form a new theory about the crime. Based on the nature of Richard and Sandra's wounds, it appeared there had been two attackers wielding two very different weapons.
Richard's injuries were chops, which would be indicative of an axe or a knife. Sandra had several elongated bruises.
In the garage, officers made a discovery that indicated the killers hadn't brought the murder weapons with them to the scene.
Richard's garage is very, very neat. He has a tool pegboard. You can tell items are missing. There's a spot here for a small hatchet. There's a spot here for a crowbar.
If they were used in the crime, the missing crowbar and axe could have inflicted lethal injuries similar to the ones Richard and Sandra sustained. They also suggested the killers were familiar enough with the house to know where to find them.
To me, as an investigator, that speaks of knowledge. That the offender knew the victims.
In the master bedroom, there was an even more telling piece of evidence.
In the midst of this big disarray of the room, someone took the time to put a doily over Sandra's face.
You walk over to the side of the bed where Richard is, and you see that the comforters and the blankets have been pulled in such a way that they cover his face.
To detectives, the covered faces not only suggested the killers knew Richard and Sandra, it was a sign they had some remorse over their actions.
When someone covers the face of someone they just killed, it's a sign of guilt. They don't want to look at their handiwork, so they cover the face.
But who in Richard and Sandra's lives would want to murder them in such a brutal fashion? To answer that question, detectives turned to the woman who initially reported the crime, Renee Volna.
When I arrive at the crime scene, Renee Volna and Ashley Gaylord, who are Jason's mother and sister respectively, are already there, giving written statements to the patrol officers.
Renee told police that the previous night her son Jason and Tabitha had gone out with Carlos Christopher and his new girlfriend Tammy Tabak. The plan was for the four of them to attend the annual Home Days Festival.
Home Days is a carnival type event that the city of Southfield puts on. It has rides, games, attractions, music, fireworks.
Renee told police Jason told her he'd be home later that night, but Jason never came home.
She was trying to get a hold of him throughout the night. She couldn't. She tried to call Richard and Sandra on their cell phones. They weren't answering. So after she got off work that day, she went to the Messina house.
When Jason's mother arrived to find a window broken out and the screen slashed open, she called 911.
Hi, I was wondering if you could put an office over here.
Renee's statement suggested the disappearances of the four teenagers might somehow be related to Richard and Sandy's brutal double homicide, and when combined with Sandra's missing GMC, suggested two very different possibilities. One was that the quartet of friends might have come back to Richard and Sandra's house, only to encounter the killer who kidnapped them in the GMC. The other, and more troubling theory, was that the four teenagers were somehow responsible for the crime and were now on the run in the stolen SUV.
So the question is, where are they? Are they together on the run?
Detectives immediately issued a bolo for Tabitha Messina, Jason Gaylord, Carlos Christopher, and Tammy Tabak. A few hours later, police tracked down two of the four possible suspects, Jason Gaylord and Tammy Tabak. Interviewing them separately, investigators peppered Jason and Tammy with questions.
I sat there for probably 2, maybe 3 hours and filled out a 12-page statement for them.
According to both Tammy and Jason, the night had been a big one for both couples. After the Home Days celebration, the group headed over to a nearby playground.
We all just hung out there and we were all just talking and everything, having a good time.
Such a good time that as the sun was setting, Jason Gaylord made a completely unexpected gesture toward his new girlfriend, Tabitha Messina.
They're at a carnival having a great time. It seems like the usual romance. And Jason gets down on one knee and says, "Will you marry me?" to Tabitha.
Tabitha was clearly caught off guard by the impromptu proposal by her teen fling, as was her former lover, Carlos.
It's very bizarre that Jason asked Tabitha to marry him.
But Carlos was even more shocked when Tabitha inexplicably accepted Jason's proposal. But before Carlos had a chance to ask Tabitha what she was thinking, Tammy Tabak said that Tabitha received a call on her cell phone. Or rather, the cell phone she borrowed from her dad's girlfriend.
Tabitha had borrowed Sandra's cell phone. Richard began to call Tabitha on that cell phone, asking her to bring it back.
Only Richard wasn't asking so much as demanding.
I could hear him screaming, "I want my damn cell phone back at the house right now."
That's when Tabitha asked Carlos, not her new fiancé Jason, to come to her rescue and take the phone back for her.
I think Tabitha had sent Carlos to make Rick even more angry.
In the past, Richard had made it clear to Tabitha he didn't want her anywhere near Carlos. So when he saw her ex-boyfriend show up on his doorstep to return Sandra's phone, he flew into a rage.
When Carlos took the phone back, he got to the sidewalk in front of the Messina house. Richard saw Carlos with the phone, and that set him off.
They get into a fight. Carlos pushes Richard. Richard punches Carlos in the face.
During the scuffle, Richard told Carlos he was going to call the cops. Carlos then fled the scene, returning to the playground where he told Tabitha, Jason, and Tammy what happened. A few minutes later, the cops showed up. They'd just spoken with Richard Messina and had a warning for Carlos.
The police find Tabitha and her group, and in speaking with them, they advise him that he is not supposed to come on the property.
But according to Tammy Tabak, Carlos wasn't the only one Richard Messina banned from his property.
Tabitha Messina was told to stay away, that she'd been thrown out of the house.
According to Tammy, Tabitha had been crushed to learn her own father had kicked her to the curb. Even though she had provoked her father and he'd threatened to throw her out in the past, she never thought he would follow through with the threat. Now stunned and distraught, Tammy said Tabitha turned to someone else for comfort. But once again, it wasn't her new fiancé, Jason Gaylord. Rather, she ran to her recent hero and old flame, Carlos Christopher. And after a long and emotional embrace, Tammy said Tabitha asked Carlos to take a walk with her, alone.
Tabitha and Carlos were kind of like, if I had to give a guess, maybe 500 to 1,000 feet ahead of us talking.
Tammy couldn't say for sure what Carlos and Tabitha had been talking about. All she knew was that she and Jason were pretty ticked off that their significant others had gone off together. After an hour of waiting, Tammy headed home. A few hours later, Tammy got a phone call from Tabitha's husband-to-be, Jason Gaylord.
Jason called me at 3:30 in the morning asking me if I had heard from Tabitha or Carlos. And I said, no, I have not heard from Tabitha or Carlos.
If Tammy Tabak's statement was true, then not only did Carlos Christopher have a physical confrontation with Tabitha's father the night of the murders, he and Tabitha were unaccounted for at the time the crime was committed.
When I started putting the timeline together, they were wondering what took, that long period of time. They really couldn't speak too well about Carlos and Tabitha's whereabouts for that whole time period.
Police couldn't help but wonder, had the former lovers reignited their old flame, if only to put an end to Tabitha's tumultuous relationship with her father and Sandra once and for all? Coming up, a single phone call transforms the case from a murder investigation into a multi-state manhunt.
The warrant says they should be considered armed and dangerous.
And police finally catch up to Carlos and Tabitha, but not before Tabitha reveals a jaw-dropping secret.
Shocked, appalled, eye-opening.
Those were in justification as to why he should become involved in this.
1997, Richard Messina and his girlfriend Sandra Cover were found brutally murdered in their home in suburban Cleveland. After speaking with Jason Gaylord and Tammy Tabak, police believed Richard's daughter, Tabitha Messina, and her former lover, Carlos Christopher, might have murdered Richard and Sandra after a confrontation over a cell phone.
The altercation had led to Tabitha telling Carlos to take back the cell phone for her. She refused to even go along with Carlos.
Based on a statement from Tammy Tabak, investigators knew that after the confrontation, Richard banned Carlos from his property and kicked Tabitha out of the house. A move police believed not only devastated Tabitha, but drove her back into Carlos's arms. But police believed that whatever satisfaction Tabitha may have felt from being reunited with Carlos was also overshadowed by the feelings of betrayal she felt after her father kicked her to the curb. Up to this point, Tabitha had done everything to make her father happy, including giving up the man she really loved. But now that Richard had thrown her out, police theorized that Tabitha had not only gone back to Carlos, but that she and Carlos had decided to murder Richard and Sandy as payback for keeping them apart in the first place. That theory gained further traction when Tammy Tabak told investigators about a phone call she received from Carlos and Tabitha the morning after the murders.
They had called me up like, we're running away to Georgia. Tabitha was like, you, me, Carlos, and Jason, we're all going to start a new life together.
According to Tammy, Tabitha's sales pitch almost worked.
Starting a new life, you know, where nobody knew me. It actually sounded good to me.
In fact, Tammy told police she was packed and waiting when Carlos and Tabitha came to pick her up in Sandra Cover's GMC Jimmy.
That's when I pretty much started getting a bad feeling internally that something wasn't right.
In another interrogation room, Tabitha's fiancé, Jason Gaylord, was telling a similar story.
Jason agreed that they're going to turn around and they're going to come back to Ohio.
Tammy and Jason weren't the only ones who had a feeling that Tabitha and Carlos were up to no good. Back at the crime scene, investigators found evidence that supported their suspicions.
A couple shirts and a knife and a fedora hat were found in the shrubs just outside of the house. Those shirts were collected and submitted for testing. Those shirts contained the DNA of both Tabitha and Carlos, respectively, along with the blood of Sandra Cover.
Between the blood evidence and the statements made by Tammy Tabak and Jason Gaylord, investigators had enough evidence to arrest the couple, who by then could be anywhere.
Warrants were issued immediately for their arrest. The warrant says they should be considered armed and dangerous.
Fortunately for investigators, just 16 hours after issuing the bolo, the owner of a motel in Avery County, North Carolina, spotted something unusual in his parking lot.
The manager wakes in the morning, goes to do his thing, opens up the door, sees a strange car in the parking lot.
It was parked crooked in the parking lot, and there was litter outside of it, as if somebody was just throwing stuff out the window.
When the motel owner approached the vehicle, he discovered two people asleep inside and immediately called the authorities.
One of our officers got there, run the tag on the vehicle.
Dispatch informs him of the be on the lookout, or the bolo, that we put on the car, that it is related to a double homicide. When he heard that, he immediately backed off, called in reinforcements.
Moments later, a team of heavily armed officers arrived on the scene and ordered Carlos and Tabitha out of the vehicle. At first, the two suspects refused.
They didn't want to exit the vehicle. We approached the vehicle, took both Carlos Christopher and Tabitha Messina out of the vehicle at gunpoint.
Before she'd even made it to the back of the squad car, Tabitha began professing her innocence.
She was saying that they did not do that, did not kill her father and his girlfriend.
Though to investigators, her behavior suggested she was guilty.
A normal human reaction, especially from someone who had nothing to do with the crime. would be sadness, would be anger, would be confusion. Tabitha exhibited none of that. She never showed any kind of remorse, any kind of sadness, any kind of concern for her father and Sandy.
But once she was back in Ohio, Tabitha told investigators an entirely different story about the murder. One that put the blame for the crime squarely at the feet of on and off again lover Carlos Christopher.
Eventually, she settled on the story that Carlos killed both Richard and Sandra, and that she was, in effect, held hostage while he did it. He threatened that if she said anything, he was going to kill her.
Unfortunately for Tabitha, there were a few problems with her story.
It was evident that they were killed with two different weapons. Richard's injuries were chops, which would be indicative of an axe or a knife. Sandra had several elongated bruises on her torso. One person assaulting both of them would likely not change weapons in doing so.
But the presence of two murder weapons wasn't the only evidence contradicting Tabitha's story. Down the hall, Carlos Christopher was giving a far different, far more contrite version of events.
Carlos maintained that he was sorry for what happened.
Carlos also maintained that killing Richard and Sandra was Tabitha's idea. According to Carlos, it all started after his altercation with Richard, when police showed up at the playground and told Tabitha she was no longer welcome at home. Carlos claimed that's when Tabitha pulled him aside and reprofessed her true feelings for him. And she immediately followed that up with a sinister proposal.
Tabitha pulled him aside and told him that, we should kill him.
But Richard wasn't the only one Tabitha wanted to kill. Carlos said Tabitha also wanted to murder Sandra, since she'd been the one who'd ratted her out over taking the cell phone. Carlos claimed he resisted the idea at first, until Tabitha told Carlos a shocking story he'd never heard before. A story that triggered a wave of emotions.
She begins to tell Carlos about what a horrible childhood she had, how she was raped repeatedly by Richard, how he'd beat her.
Like Carlos, detectives were stunned by the accusations of abuse.
It's bull when it comes to any type of sexual abuse. I would stake my life on that. My dad despised those type of people.
Whether or not Tabitha's accusations were true, one thing was certain. They infuriated Carlos.
Those were in justification as to why he should become involved in this homicide.
But anger was only one of the emotions Carlos experienced that night. As he listened to Tabitha spell out her murderous plan, Carlos also felt the sexual spark between them reignite.
She used her sexuality or her power of persuasion over Carlos Christopher to recruit him to be part of this act of homicide.
At that point, Carlos and Tabitha decided they could no longer keep their hands off one another. So they ditched Tammy and Jason and headed for a private spot not far from the playground.
There was a level of intimacy that night.
Fueled by their reignited passion and a new commitment to be together no matter the consequences, Carlos said he and Tabitha made their way to Richard and Sandy's house, though Carlos claimed he still had no plans to kill anybody.
He maintained that he never wanted to hurt anybody. He just wanted to scare him. He just wanted to stop him from hurting Tabitha.
But once they broke into the house, it became clear to Carlos that Tabitha was out for blood.
They went into the bedroom. He stood over Richard. Tabitha stood over Sandra. And just about the time that Carlos was going to wake Richard up, he looks over and sees Tabitha wailing on Sandy with a crowbar.
According to Carlos, the sound of Tabitha attacking Sandy jolted Richard Messina awake. That's when Carlos claimed he reacted without thinking.
Carlos, he says his mind froze, and at that time, he hit Richard with the axe.
Chopped Rick in the neck, almost decapitated him.
Death came to Richard Messina in a matter of moments following those multiple blows of the hatchet.
Richard Messina may have died instantly, but not Sandy Cover. According to Carlos, she and Tabitha were locked in a desperate struggle.
Tabitha says to him, Carlos, kill this bitch.
At that point, Carlos helped Tabitha finish off Sandra. Then, the couple had grabbed some money and jewelry from the bedroom before escaping in Sandy's GMC.
They tried to kind of hide the scene by ransacking the place and looking as though someone else who didn't know the family did it.
With Carlos's confession in tow, investigators charged him and Tabitha with a laundry list of felonies, including breaking and entering, robbery, and 2 counts of aggravated murder.
Shocked, appalled, eye-opening. The community had never experienced a crime of such violence that was publicized so heavily.
Amidst this growing media frenzy, prosecutors announced that they would seek the death penalty against Tabitha and Carlos.
There were additional felonies that were committed, and the level of cruelty that went into this type of killing and how it was perpetrated would definitely make this a death penalty eligible case.
Which suited the victims' families just fine, despite the fact that one of the accused was their own flesh and blood.
Most of us wanted the death penalty. I know I wanted the death penalty. An eye for an eye.
Coming up, a series of gruesome revelations sends family members fleeing from the courtroom.
They couldn't handle it. He basically wanted to see him burn in hell.
And Carlos and Tabitha's dueling statements are put on trial. But who will the jury believe?
You could hear an audible gasp throughout the courtroom.
May 2008. It had now been 9 months since teen lovers Tabitha Messina and Carlos Christopher fled the Cleveland suburbs after allegedly murdering Tabitha's father, Richard Messina, and his girlfriend, Sandra Cover. After being on the run for less than 24 hours, Carlos and Tabitha were arrested outside a motel in rural North Carolina and were charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder. And prosecutors announced they'd be seeking the death penalty against both of them.
These were capital murder cases, so under Ohio law, the court can hold you without bond when the charge is for the death penalty.
But while the couple had allegedly killed together, they would be tried separately. Carlos, who'd already confessed to murdering Richard Messina, would be tried first. Prosecutors opened their case by rolling out the physical evidence linking Carlos to the crime.
Prosecuting attorney just methodically went through everything. There was no question as to the quality of the proof that Carlos Christopher and Tabitha Messina were the perpetrators of this homicide.
To hammer home their point, prosecutors submitted crime scene photos as evidence that Carlos attacked Richard Messina and then Sandra with the rage of a man hell-bent on murder. According to prosecutors, every hack delivered to Richard and Sandra's bodies was backed by an anger and resentment that Carlos had built up against the man who had forbidden him from being with his true love.
Blood was flying inside of that room. This was not an intent to scare anyone.
The crime scene photos were powerful, but they were more than some family members could stomach.
My mom left the courtroom. My brother Ted left the courtroom. They didn't look at those pictures. They couldn't handle it.
When it was their turn, Carlos's defense team claimed that while there was no denying their client had taken part in the murder, he certainly wasn't the crime's mastermind.
Carlos Christopher's claim was that he was not the principal offender, that Tabitha Messina was the motivator and the leader of this act of homicide.
Tabitha just kept pushing this idea that her father is sexually assaulting her to him in an effort to convince him to go forward with the plan.
But prosecutors fired back that there was no proof that Richard Messina had ever assaulted his daughter, and that the entire story was nothing more than a ruse.
There was never any evidence of any type of abuse by the part of Richard Messina against his daughter. Those were inventions that Tabitha Messina perhaps gave to Carlos Christopher as a justification as to why he should become involved in this homicide.
After 3 days of testimony, both sides rested. 48 hours later, the three-judge panel returned with a verdict.
Carlos Christopher was convicted of aggravated murder.
With the verdict rendered, it was now time for the sentencing hearing. This time, prosecutors opened by offering up a series of fiery victims' impact statements.
One of them was really adamant about Carlos getting the death penalty. He basically wanted to see him burn in hell.
When it was their turn, the defense argued that the judges should take into account Carlos's traumatic childhood in the slums of Brazil.
Carlos's attorney said that Carlos was born into the formal equivalent of a toxic waste dump.
They used his upbringing in the mitigation, citing the fact that he witnessed all this violence when he was a kid.
Tales of Carlos's troubled childhood didn't seem to sway the victims' families.
You could see the victims' families shake their heads.
Oh, he didn't have enough hugs, and oh, he was born in Brazil, and his mom died in prison, and I don't care.
So instead of letting his attorneys do the talking, Carlos Christopher decided to take the stand and attempt to personally atone for his crimes.
He actually offered an apology on the last day of the sentencing, and the emotional way that he projected those words felt as though he was apologetic and regretted what he did.
While Carlos's tearful plea didn't sway family members, it did seem to have some impact on the judges.
The judges felt, based by the circumstances surrounding the homicide, that the appropriate punishment in this type of a case would not be the death penalty.
Carlos Christopher was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences with no possibility for parole. You could hear an audible gasp throughout the courtroom, followed by some crying and some tears from the families because they really wanted the death penalty.
But if it was the death penalty victims' families were after, they'd have another chance to see justice served when Richard's daughter, Tabitha, stood trial. Coming up, the court hears from Tabitha herself.
I was selfish, and I wanted everything.
And Tabitha's defense makes a bold move, one that may render her entire trial obsolete.
We were looking for justice.
October 24th, 2008. It had been more than a year since 19-year-old Tabitha Messina had been arrested for the murders of her father, Richard, and his girlfriend, Sandra Cover. Earlier that year, Carlos Christopher, Tabitha's friend turned lover turned co-conspirator, had been convicted by a 3-judge panel. But a heartfelt apology during his sentencing helped Carlos avoid the death penalty.
He apologized to the victims' families for what he did. He knew what he did was wrong.
Although Tabitha also faced a possible death sentence if convicted, she had been anything but remorseful in the weeks leading up to her trial.
She was very defiant. My defense is going to be that I was abused, so it was justified.
But then, just days before Tabitha's trial was scheduled to begin,
She changed her plea from not guilty to guilty.
apparently, Tabitha's sudden about-face came after prosecutors made an offer too good to pass up.
By entering a guilty plea, the death penalty was taken off the table.
They felt, based by the circumstances surrounding the homicide, that the appropriate punishment in this type of a case would not be the death penalty.
The plea bargain angered some members of the victims' families.
I don't understand why there is a death penalty. If they don't get the death penalty, why is there a death penalty? We were looking for
justice.
Under the order of the plea bargain, Tabitha would be able to save her own life, albeit behind bars. Tabitha seized the opportunity, taking the stand and offering up an apology even more emotional than Carlos's.
I was selfish. I wanted everything. I ruined that, Your Honor.
She said I had a good father. My father was good to me. He loved me. But I pushed his buttons.
But as tearful as her apology was, Tabitha's own family wasn't buying it.
They were crocodile tears. There's no way that Tabitha's statement was sincere or true in any way.
The presiding judge wasn't buying it either. He sentenced Tabitha to 30 years to life for each murder, with the sentences to run consecutively.
She won't see the light of day until she's 80, if that. She'll be eligible for parole when she's 80. It is my fervent hope that someday she gets shanked in prison. Then maybe justice will be finally done.
Whether Tabitha Messina ever walks out of prison or not, one thing is certain. The connection between Tabitha and Carlos was powerful enough to ultimately bring them back together, even if the cause for their reunion was to kill the very people who kept them apart.
Tabitha is wholly evil. He was really just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person, and he'll spend the rest of his life regretting it. Tabitha may not be regretting it.
Gazing at the stars in the velvet sky, lost in memories of a time gone by. Melodies of the past played in my mind, whispers of the wind slowing down time. Let the music surround us, take us away to a sweeter place where memories stay. In this world of dreams, we will find a little piece of soul in the music that binds, painting pictures in the colors of sound. Echoes of the heart softly resound, lost in the rhythm, feeling so free.